The rope bit deep into Cordelia Westmere's wrists as three bearded men dragged her from her burning cabin, her auburn hair catching firelight like autumn leaves. Her daughter Magnolia pressed herself against the oak tree's rough bark, watching in horror as the settlers forced her mother to her knees in the dirt. "This'll teach you to harbor redskins, woman," growled Hoskins, the leader with tobacco-stained teeth and cruel eyes. He drew his hunting knife, its blade gleaming wickedly in the orange glow. "Starting with that pretty hair of yours." Cordelia's emerald eyes blazed with defiance even as tears streaked down her soot-stained cheeks. "I gave water to a dying child, nothing more." "Apache child," spat another man, Grimsby, his weathered face twisted with hatred. "Same as giving aid to the enemy." The blade sliced through Cordelia's thick tresses, each severed lock falling to the earth like dying birds. Magnolia bit her fist to stifle her sobs, her 16-year-old heart breaking with each cruel cut. Her mother had always been beautiful, the belle of their small frontier settlement of Willowbrook, but now she looked small and broken, her hair shorn ragged and uneven. "Please," Cordelia whispered, her voice hoarse from smoke and fear. "My daughter, she's just a child." "Should have thought of that before you betrayed your own kind," Hoskins snarled, binding her ankles with rough hemp rope that left angry welts on her pale skin. From her hiding place, Magnolia watched the men secure her mother to the hitching post like a common criminal. The settlement had gone mad since the Apache raids began 3 months ago. Fear had turned neighbors into monsters, compassion into treason. Her mother's only crime had been showing mercy to a wounded Apache boy who'd collapsed near their well, giving him water and food before he disappeared back into the wilderness. As the men departed to continue their vigilante justice elsewhere, Magnolia crept from her hiding spot. But before she could reach her mother, a shadow fell across the clearing. She gasped, stumbling backward as a massive figure emerged from the tree line. The Apache warrior stood nearly 7 feet tall, his bronze skin gleaming in the firelight, his long black hair braided with eagle feathers and silver ornaments. Scars crisscrossed his broad chest, speaking of battles won and lost. His dark eyes held the wisdom of the mountains and the fury of storms. And when he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a great cat. Magnolia had heard whispers of him, Kaiatur, the giant of the Sangre de Cristo, a legend made flesh who could track a man across stone and fight off 10 enemies with just his war club. The settlers feared him more than death itself. Giant. Magnolia burst from her hiding place, desperation overwhelming terror. She fell to her knees before the towering warrior, her hands clasped in supplication. "Please, they've taken my mother. She helped your people, showed kindness to an Apache child, and now they've cut her hair and bound her like an animal." Kaitur's obsidian gaze moved from the sobbing girl to the woman tied to the post. Cordelia had lifted her head, her shorn locks framing a face that remained beautiful despite her ordeal. Their eyes met across the smoky clearing, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, or the spark of something deeper. "She gave water to Swift Deer, my nephew." Kaitur's voice rumbled like distant thunder. "I have watched her from the mountains. She is different from the others." "Then help her," Magnolia pleaded. "The soldiers will come at dawn to take her to the territorial prison. She'd die there. I know she will." The giant Apache warrior stepped closer to Cordelia, studying her face in the flickering light. Something ancient and primal stirred in his chest as he looked upon this brave white woman who had shown mercy when others showed only hatred. "Your mother," he said to Magnolia without taking his eyes from Cordelia, "she is not married?" "Widowed 2 years past," Magnolia whispered, hope beginning to bloom in her heart. Kaiatur nodded slowly, his decision crystallizing like ice on winter streams. Kaiatur approached Cordelia with the silent grace of a mountain lion, his massive frame casting shadows that danced in the dying firelight. Up close, She could see the intricate tattoos that spiraled across his chest and arm, symbols of his clan, his victories, his spiritual journey through the sacred peaks. "You are Cordelia Westmere," he said, his English surprisingly refined, touched only lightly with the cadence of his native tongue. "The woman who saved Swift Deer." Cordelia lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite her vulnerable position. "I did what any Christian soul should do." He was just a boy, dying of thirst. "The boy lives because of your kindness. His grandfather, Chief Ayana, has spoken your name with honor around our fires." Kaiatur knelt before her, his great hands gentle as he examined the cruel ropes that bound her. "These bindings, they shame the ones who tied them." With a swift movement, he drew a knife from his belt, not the crude blade of the settlers, but a beautiful weapon with a bone handle carved with eagles and wolves. The razor-sharp obsidian edge sliced through her bonds as if they were spider silk. Cordelia gasped as circulation returned to her hands and feet, flexing her fingers as Kaiatur helped her stand. This close, she could smell sage and wood smoke on his skin, could see the intelligence burning in his dark eyes. Everything the settlers had told her about the Apache being savages seemed suddenly, impossibly wrong. "Thank you," she whispered, acutely aware that she reached barely to his chest, that his hands could crush her without effort, yet held her with infinite care. "Do not thank me yet, Cordelia Westmere. I come with a purpose that may frighten you more than these ropes." Magnolia crept closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What purpose?" Kaiatur's gaze never left Cordelia's face. "The soldiers will come for you at sunrise. They will drag you to Fort Garrison, where you will face trial for treason. The territorial judge, Colonel Blackthorne, has hanged women for less. You will not survive." The truth of his words settled over Cordelia like a burial shroud. She had seen the hatred in Hoskins' eyes, heard the bloodthirsty calls for justice from the other settlers. Her act of mercy had branded her as traitor in their minds. "Then I will face whatever comes with dignity," she said quietly. "There is another way." Kaiatur's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Among my people, when a woman is in mortal danger, she may claim protection through marriage to a warrior. No soldier would dare touch the wife of Kaiatur, the giant of the mountains. Your life would be sacred, protected by Apache law and my strength." Cordelia's breath caught. "You're asking me to marry you?" "I am offering you life when the alternative is certain death." Magnolia stepped forward, her young voice trembling with desperate hope. "Mama, you have to say yes, please. I can't lose you too." But Cordelia was studying Kaiatur's face, searching for something deeper than mere obligation. "And what would you gain from such an arrangement? Surely the great Apache warrior has no need for a disgraced white woman." A shadow of something pain, perhaps, or loneliness flickered across Kaiatur's features. "I have walked alone for many seasons. My people say the spirits have chosen no woman worthy of standing beside their protector. But when I watched you risk your life to save Swift Deer, when I saw you defy your own people to show mercy... He paused, his hand reaching up to touch her cheek with surprising tenderness. Perhaps the spirits spoke truly. Perhaps they simply waited for the right woman to prove her worth. The admission hung between them like morning mist, fragile and beautiful. Cordelia felt something stir in her chest, not just gratitude, but genuine attraction to this gentle giant who spoke of spirits and mercy with equal reverence. "If I say yes," she whispered, "truly yes, not just to escape death but to build a life, would you have me?" Kaiatur's smile transformed his entire face, revealing the man beneath the legend. "Cordelia Westmere, I would count myself the most blessed of all warriors." Dawn approached like a golden wolf through the pine trees as Kaiatur led Cordelia and Magnolia deeper into the wilderness. They moved swiftly but silently, the Apache warriors' knowledge of every hidden trail and secret passage keeping them well ahead of the pursuing soldiers who would soon discover Cordelia's empty bonds. "Where are we going?" Magnolia whispered, struggling to keep pace with her mother and the giant who moved through the forest as if it were his personal domain. To the sacred grove, Kayatur replied without slowing. Where the old ones perform the first marriage ceremonies, where the spirits of mountain and sky witness all unions. Cordelia felt her heart racing not from exertion, but from the magnitude of what was about to happen. In the space of one terrible night, she had lost her home, nearly lost her life, and now was about to bind herself to a man she barely knew. Yet something deep in her soul whispered that this was right, that fate had woven their paths together through threads of mercy and blood. They climbed higher into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, following deer paths and ancient Apache routes that no white man had ever seen. As they ascended, the air grew thinner and somehow purer, carrying scents of pine sap, wild sage, and something indefinable, something sacred. The sacred grove revealed itself as they crested a small rise, a perfect circle of towering ponderosa pines, surrounding a natural clearing where wildflowers grew in impossible profusion despite the early spring season. At the center stood a ring of weathered stones, each one carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. This place ... Cordelia breathed, feeling power humming in the very air. Here, the barrier between the spirit world and ours grows thin, Kayatur explained, his voice filled with reverence. My ancestors have sealed their sacred bonds in this place for countless generations. As if summoned by his words, figures began emerging from the tree line. Cordelia tensed, but Kayatur's gentle hand on her shoulder steadied her. These were Apache men and women of all ages, their faces painted with sacred symbols, carrying items Cordelia didn't recognize but somehow understood were important. An ancient woman approached, her silver hair braided with turquoise and shell beads, her eyes holding the wisdom of many decades. Grandmother Itzel, Kayatur murmured, bowing deeply. I have brought the woman who saved Swift Deer. Itzel studied Cordelia with those ancient eyes, seeing past skin and surface to something deeper. You would bind yourself to our protector, white woman? You understand what this means? I understand that your nephew would have died without water, Cordelia replied steadily. I understand that mercy should know no boundaries of tribe or color. And I understand that this man offered me life when my own people would have given me death. And your heart? Does it speak as clearly as your mind? Cordelia glanced at Kayatur, seeing the vulnerability he tried to hide behind his stoic mask. My heart tells me that love can grow from respect and kindness, that some bonds are forged by choice rather than chance. Grandmother Itzel nodded slowly, then began to chant in the Apache tongue, her voice joined by the other members of the tribe. They formed a circle around Cordelia and Kayatur, their voices rising and falling like mountain wind through the pines. Give me your hands, Kayatur said softly, and when Cordelia complied, he began to bind their wrists together with a cord woven from sweetgrass and horsehair. In the Apache way, husband and wife become one spirit dwelling in two bodies. What must I do? Cordelia asked, feeling the solemnity of the moment settle over her like a sacred blanket. Speak from your heart. The spirits will hear truth. Cordelia looked into his dark eyes and found her voice. I, Cordelia Westmere, take you, Kayatur, as my husband. I promise to walk beside you through whatever storms may come, to honor your people as my own, and to love you with a heart that grows stronger each day. Kayatur's own vows rumbled like distant thunder. I, Kayatur of the Mountain Clan, take you as my wife. I promise to protect you and your daughter with my life, to cherish your courage, and to prove worthy of the gift you give me. As their words echoed through the grove, the sun broke over the mountain peaks, bathing them in golden light. The honeymoon was brief and beautiful, lasting only 3 days in a hidden canyon where wildflowers bloomed and a crystal stream sang ancient songs. Kayatur showed Cordelia how to identify edible plants, how to read the language of animal tracks in mud, and how to find true north by the stars. In return, she taught him English poetry and shared stories of her life before the frontier, her childhood in Boston, her brief marriage to a gentleman who died of consumption, her dreams of building something lasting in the untamed West. But their sanctuary couldn't last forever. On the fourth morning, smoke signals rose from distant peaks, carrying urgent messages in a code Cordelia was beginning to understand. "What do they say?" she asked, watching Kayatur's face grow grave as he interpreted the symbols. "Colonel Blackthorn has declared war on all Apache bands. He claims we kidnapped and killed you." Kayatur's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "He's burning Apache camps, killing anyone who won't surrender to the reservation." Magnolia, who had been gathering berries nearby, dropped her basket. "But that's not true. You saved Mama's life." "Truth matters little to men like Blackthorn," Kayatur replied grimly. "He needs an excuse to finish what he started, the complete removal of my people from these mountains." Cordelia felt ice forming in her stomach. Her choice to marry Kayatur hadn't just saved her life, it had condemned an entire people to persecution. "We have to stop him. We have to tell everyone what really happened." "And who will believe the word of an Apache warrior and a woman branded as traitor?" Kayatur asked gently. "No, my heart. There is only one way to stop this madness, which is, I must challenge Blackthorn to single combat. By the old laws that still govern the frontier, if he loses, his war dies with him." Horror flooded through Cordelia. "No, he'll never fight fair. He'll have 100 soldiers with rifles." "Not if the challenge is witnessed by enough people. Even Blackthorn must maintain some pretense of honor before the territorial governor." Kayatur cupped her face in his great hands. "It is the only way, beloved. Too much blood has already been spilled." That afternoon, they rode into Willowbrook together, Kayatur on his magnificent black stallion, Cordelia mounted on a gentle mare he'd somehow procured, Magnolia riding double behind her mother. The sight of them approaching sent the entire settlement into chaos. Women screamed and children ran as Kayatur dismounted in the town square, but Cordelia's clear voice cut through the panic. "Stop, listen to me. I am alive and well, married by my own choice to this man who saved my life." The crowd that gathered was a mixture of fearful settlers and blue-uniformed soldiers, with Colonel Blackthorn at their center. He was a tall, thin man with cold eyes and a carefully waxed mustache, his uniform immaculate despite the frontier conditions. "Mrs. Westmere," Blackthorn said with false concern, "we've been told you were kidnapped and murdered by this savage." "Are you speaking under duress?" "I speak as a free woman who chose her own path," Cordelia replied firmly. "No one kidnapped me. No one threatened me. This man offered me protection when my own neighbors would have left me to hang." "Lies," spat Hoskins from the crowd. "Apache lies." But other voices rose in support, people who had known Cordelia all her life, who recognized the truth in her words. The crowd began to murmur and shift, uncertainty replacing blind hatred. Kayatur stepped forward, his presence immediately commanding attention. "I am Kayatur of the Mountain Clan. I claim the right of single combat against any man who calls me liar or murderer." Blackthorn's eyes glittered with anticipation. "You would challenge a representative of the United States Army?" "I challenge any man who brings war to innocent people based on lies." "Very well," Blackthorn smiled coldly. "Tomorrow at dawn in this square. To the death." As the crowd dispersed in excitement and terror, Cordelia gripped her husband's arm. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back to me." Kayatur's answer was a kiss that tasted of determination and unspoken love. Dawn broke gray and cold over Willowbrook, mist rising from the creek that ran behind the settlement like the breath of sleeping spirits. The entire town had gathered in the square, along with soldiers from Fort Garrison and Apache warriors who had slipped down from the mountains to witness their champion's battle. Cordelia stood at the edge of the crowd, Magnolia pressed close to her side, watching as Kayatur performed his pre-battle rituals. He had painted his face with sacred symbols using clay and ochre, each mark telling a story of courage and honor. His long hair was braided with eagle feathers given to him by grandmother Itzel, and around his neck hung a medicine bag containing herbs and stones blessed by the tribal shamans. Colonel Blackthorn, by contrast, appeared in full military dress uniform, his sword gleaming at his side, a matched pair of Colt revolvers holstered at his belt. He had chosen weapons cavalry sabers at 20 paces, with the option to draw pistols if both men still stood after the blade work. "Seems hardly fair," muttered Doc Hennessy, the town's physician. "Apache's got nothing but that war club and a knife." "Don't underestimate him," replied Mayor Cromwell nervously. "I've heard stories ... Kayatur had indeed chosen traditional weapons, his great war club carved from ironwood and inlaid with silver, and a long knife forged from meteorite metal by Apache smiths. To the settlers he looked primitively armed. To his own people he carried the weapons of their greatest heroes. Judge Morrison, a fair-minded man despite his allegiance to the territorial government, stepped into the center of the square. This combat is to settle the matter of Apache aggression and the alleged kidnapping of Mrs. Cordelia Westmere. Colonel Blackthorn represents the United States military. Kayatur represents the Apache people. The combat will continue until one man yields or dies." "I'll never yield to a savage," Blackthorn snarled, drawing his saber with a flourish. "Nor I to a man who makes war on innocents," Kayatur replied calmly, hefting his war club. The signal came from Judge Morrison's raised handkerchief dropping to the earth. Blackthorn immediately charged forward, his saber cutting deadly arcs through the morning air. He was a trained swordsman, his blade work precise and lethal. But Kayatur moved like liquid shadow, his war club spinning in patterns that seemed to bend reality around them. The ironwood weapon caught Blackthorn's blade again and again, the clash of metal on wood ringing across the square like church bells. "Impossible," breathed a cavalry captain. "No wooden club should be able to turn a Toledo steel blade." Cordelia watched in fascination and terror as her husband fought. Every movement was poetry, every block and strike perfectly timed. Blackthorn was skilled, but Kayatur fought as if the spirits of his ancestors guided his hands. The duel ranged across the square, Blackthorn pressing his attack with increasing desperation as his blade failed to find its mark. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air, and his breathing grew labored while Kayatur remained calm and centered. Then Blackthorn made his mistake. Overextending on a thrust meant to pierce Kayatur's heart, he left himself open for a split second. The Apache warrior's club swept around in a crushing arc, striking the colonel's wrist and sending his saber spinning away into the dirt. Blackthorn immediately reached for his pistol, but Kayatur's knife was already at his throat, the meteoric steel gleaming like captured starlight. "Yield," Kayatur commanded softly. The square fell silent except for Blackthorn's harsh breathing and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Every eye was fixed on the two men, the defeated colonel and the victorious Apache warrior whose blade could end a life with the slightest pressure. Double quotes Blackthorn's voice cracked. "I yield." A cheer went up from the Apache spectators while the soldiers stood in stunned silence. Judge Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the square. "By right of combat, Kayatur of the Apache has proven his cause just. Colonel Blackthorn's war against the Apache people is hereby declared unlawful." But Cordelia saw something in Blackthorn's eyes that chilled her blood, a hatred so deep it would not be satisfied by mere defeat. That evening, as Willowbrook celebrated an uneasy peace, Cordelia found herself unable to shake the feeling of impending doom. She and Kayatur had been given the use of the parsonage while Reverend Michaels visited his sister in Denver, and though the townspeople treated them with new respect born of witnessed prowess, she sensed undercurrents of resentment and fear. "You're troubled, my heart," Kayatur observed, finding her on the porch as she watched the sun set behind the mountains. The bruises from his battle with Blackthorn were already fading. Apache healing knowledge ran deep, but concern etched lines around his dark eyes. "Blackthorn won't honor the result," Cordelia said quietly. "I saw his face when he yielded. He's planning something." Kayatur nodded grimly. "I know. Swift Deer brought word from the fort soldiers are still preparing for war despite the colonel's public defeat. He tells them the combat was meaningless, that no savage ritual can override military orders." From inside the house came the sound of Magnolia practicing piano, a hauntingly beautiful melody that seemed to weave itself into the evening air. The girl had adapted to their new life with remarkable resilience, already beginning to learn Apache words and customs from the women who came to visit Cordelia. "There's more," Kayatur continued. "My scouts report that Blackthorn has sent for reinforcements from Fort Collins. 2 companies of cavalry with orders to pacify hostile Apache elements regardless of any territorial court decisions." Cordelia felt her heart sink. "How long do we have?" 3 days, perhaps 4. They were interrupted by the sound of running footsteps. Doc Hennessy appeared around the corner of the house, his medical bag in one hand and his face flushed with exertion. "Kayatur, thank God you're here. It's Swift Deer, someone shot him." They found a young Apache boy in Doc Hennessy's office, his shoulder bandaged but his eyes bright with urgency. Despite his wound, he struggled to sit up when he saw Kayatur approach. "Uncle," he gasped in Apache, then switched to broken English for Cordelia's benefit. "Soldier ... follow me from fort. I bring warning trap waiting." "What trap?" Kayatur knelt beside the boy, his face grave. "Colonel ... he say you killed during escape. Say Apache ... attack settlement. All warriors must die to protect white people." The implications hit Cordelia like a physical blow. "He's going to stage our deaths and use them as justification for massacre." "When?" Kayatur demanded. Swift Deer's eyes began to close as exhaustion and blood loss took their toll. "Tomorrow, before dawn, soldiers come here ... burn house with you inside. Make look like Apache raid." Doc Hennessy checked the boy's pulse and nodded to Kayatur. "He'll live, but he needs rest. Lost a lot of blood getting here." Outside, Cordelia gripped her husband's arm. "We have to warn the others. If Blackthorn is willing to murder us to justify his war, no Apache is safe." "Already done," Kayatur replied. The moment Swift Deer brought his message, signal fires lit the mountain peaks. "My people know what's coming. Then we run. Tonight, all of us." But Kayatur shook his head slowly. "Running only delays the inevitable. Blackthorn will hunt us until he has his war, and innocent people will die because of his hatred." His jaw set with determination. "No, we end this tonight." "How?" "By turning his trap against him." Kayatur's eyes gleamed with cunning that would have impressed the greatest Apache war chiefs. "By proving to everyone in this settlement exactly what kind of man they've been following." That night, as the moon rode high and cold above Willowbrook, Cordelia helped her husband prepare for what might be their final battle. But this time, they wouldn't be fighting with weapons of steel and stone. They would be fighting with truth, courage, and the kind of love that could move mountains or stop wars. "Whatever happens," Cordelia whispered as they checked their preparations one last time, "I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made." Kayatur's kiss tasted of promises and unshakable resolve. The plan unfolded with the precision of a master strategist combined with the spiritual guidance of Apache tradition. As midnight approached, Cordelia and Magnolia hid in the root cellar beneath Doc Hennessy's office, while Kaiatur positioned himself in the shadows of the parsonage, waiting for Blackthorn's soldiers to arrive. But they weren't alone in their vigil. Throughout the settlement, trusted allies had taken their positions, Mayor Cromwell with his camera equipment behind the general store, Judge Morrison concealed in the church bell tower with a clear view of the parsonage, and Doc Hennessy himself crouched near the town well with a bag full of medical supplies and legal documents. Most surprisingly, a dozen Apache warriors led by Grandmother Itzel had slipped into town under cover of darkness, positioning themselves where they could witness everything but remain unseen unless needed. This night would be about justice, not war. At exactly 1 o'clock in the morning, 12 cavalry soldiers approached the parsonage with oil-soaked torches and kerosene. Colonel Blackthorn himself led them, his face twisted with hatred and anticipation. In his mind, he was about to solve the Apache problem permanently while eliminating the witnesses to his dishonor. "Surround the house," he commanded in a harsh whisper. "When I give the signal, light it up. Make sure nothing survives." But as the soldiers spread out, Mayor Cromwell's camera flash exploded from the shadows, capturing their faces in stark, incriminating detail. The sudden light and smoke caused confusion, and in that moment of chaos, Kiter's voice rang out like thunder across the square. "People of Willowbrook, come see how your colonel wages war on innocents." Windows began opening throughout the settlement as residents awakened to the commotion. Church bells rang as Judge Morrison pulled the ropes, summoning everyone to witness what was happening in their town square. "It's a trap," Blackthorn snarled, drawing his pistol. "Kill them all." But as his soldiers raised their weapons, Apache warriors materialized from the shadows like vengeful spirits. They didn't attack, they simply stood there, silent and imposing, making it clear that any violence would be answered in kind. More importantly, the townspeople were now pouring into the square men, women and children who could see with their own eyes that soldiers had come in the night to burn down a house with a family sleeping inside. Colonel Blackthorn. Judge Morrison called from the bell tower. "By what authority do you bring armed men to burn buildings in my jurisdiction?" "By the authority of military necessity," Blackthorn shouted back, his composure cracking. "These Apache sympathizers are enemies of the United States." "I am a United States citizen," Cordelia's voice rang clear as she emerged from the root cellar with Magnolia at her side. "Are you declaring war on your own people, Colonel?" The crowd murmured angrily. These were frontier people who understood the value of due process and legal rights, even in harsh times. The sight of soldiers preparing to burn a house with a family inside struck at their most basic sense of justice. "This woman is a traitor," Blackthorn insisted, but his voice held a note of desperation now. "She married a savage. She gave aid to our enemies." "I married the man who saved my life," Cordelia replied steadily, "and I gave water to a dying child. If that makes me a traitor in your eyes, then I wear the title proudly." Grandmother Itzel stepped forward from the shadows, her ancient voice carrying surprising power. "I am Itzel, grandmother of Swift Deer, the child this woman saved. In Apache law, she is now my daughter, under the protection of all our clans. Any who harm her will face the wrath of the mountain spirits." Doc Hennessy raised his voice from beside the well. "And in territorial law, she's committed no crime. I have here the legal documents proving her marriage was voluntary, witnessed, and binding under both civil and tribal authority." The tide of opinion was turning. Blackthorn could see it in the faces around him, anger replacing fear, disgust replacing hatred. His grand plan was crumbling and desperation made him dangerous. "Enough of this," he roared, raising his pistol toward Cordelia. "I'll end this here and now." Time seemed to crystallize into perfect clarity as Blackthorn's pistol swung toward Cordelia. Every person in the square held their breath, frozen between heartbeats as death balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. But Kaietur moved like lightning given human form, his great body interceding between his wife and the gun. The pistol cracked like thunder, its muzzle flash illuminating faces twisted with shock and horror. "No!" Cordelia's scream tore through the night as Kaietur staggered, crimson spreading across his chest where the bullet had found its mark. Yet the Apache warrior didn't fall. Blood streaked his bronze skin, but his eyes remained clear and determined as he advanced on Blackthorn with implacable purpose. The colonel's face went white with terror as he realized his shot, though accurate, hadn't been enough to stop the giant. "Impossible," Blackthorn whispered, frantically trying to reload his weapon. "I put that bullet through your heart." "The heart of a man who fights for love is not so easily stopped," Kaietur replied, his voice steady despite the pain. With one massive hand, he knocked the pistol from Blackthorn's grip, sending it skittering across the dirt. The soldiers raised their rifles, but Judge Morrison's voice cracked like a whip from the bell tower. "Any man who fires on an unarmed opponent will answer to territorial law. I am the legal authority here, and I order you to stand down." Confusion rippled through the military ranks. Their colonel had just attempted murder in front of 100 witnesses, violating every code of military honor. Some lowered their weapons, while others looked uncertainly between their disgraced officer and the territorial judge. Doc Hennessy rushed forward to examine Kaietur's wound, his medical training overriding any consideration of danger. "Hold still, you stubborn fool," he muttered, probing the injury. "Bullets lodged in the muscle, missed your lung by inches. You'll live, but you need immediate treatment." But Kaietur's attention was fixed on Blackthorn, who had fallen to his knees in the dirt, his carefully maintained facade finally crumbling. "Why?" the Apache warrior asked quietly. "Why did you need this war so badly that you would murder innocents to start it?" Blackthorn's answer came in a broken whisper that carried across the silent square. "My son ... my boy Marcus. He died in an Apache raid last year. 18 years old, full of dreams ... double quotes, his voice cracked with grief and madness. I needed someone to pay. I needed them all to pay." A ripple of understanding moved through the crowd. Grief could drive good men to evil acts, could twist love into hatred, hope into despair. Grandmother Itzel approached the broken colonel, her ancient face creased with unexpected compassion. "Your son," she said gently. "What was his name again?" "Marcus," Blackthorn choked. "Marcus Eugene Blackthorn." "Ah." The old woman nodded slowly. "He was the soldier who tried to protect our women and children during the raid on Crow Creek. He died throwing himself between our people and the bullets of his own men when they began shooting indiscriminately." Blackthorn looked up sharply, confusion replacing despair. "What? Your son was a hero, Colonel." "When the shooting started, he tried to stop it. Apache mothers still speak his name with honor around their fires. His death was mourned by both our peoples." The revelation struck Blackthorn like a physical blow. Everything he had believed, all the hatred he had nursed, all the innocent blood he had been prepared to spill, it all crumbled in the face of this truth. He ... he tried to protect Apache children? "With his life," Grandmother Itzel confirmed solemnly. "The raid was started by rogue warriors acting against our chief's wishes. Your son died trying to prevent a massacre. In our tradition, such courage earns a place of honor in the eternal hunting grounds." Tears began streaming down Blackthorn's face as the weight of his misguided vengeance crashed down upon him. "What have I done? What have I almost done?" Judge Morrison climbed down from the bell tower, his face grave but not unkind. "Colonel, by the authority vested in me by the territorial government, I hereby relieve you of command and place you under arrest for attempted murder, violation of civil authority, and conduct unbecoming an officer." Two of Blackthorn's own sergeants stepped forward, their faces reflecting shame for their colonel's actions. "Sir, one said quietly. We'll see that you're transported to Denver for proper military tribunal. As they led the broken man away, he turned back to Kayatur. I'm sorry, he whispered. God forgive me, I'm so sorry. Kayatur nodded gravely, one warrior acknowledging another's pain. The spirits of our sons watch over us all, Colonel. Perhaps they will find peace knowing their deaths finally brought understanding instead of more bloodshed. The crowd began to disperse as Doc Hennessy insisted on getting Kayatur to his office for proper medical attention. But as they walked, Captain Reynolds, Blackthorn's second-in-command, approached with obvious reluctance. Mr. Kayatur, he said formally, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for Colonel Blackthorn's actions. They do not represent our values or our mission. He paused, clearly struggling with his words. I've been ordered to offer you and your people safe passage to any reservation you choose with guarantees of fair treatment. We choose these mountains, Kayatur replied simply. They are our home. We will defend them if we must, but we prefer to live in peace with our neighbors. Captain Reynolds nodded. I'll recommend to my superiors that the Apache be allowed to remain in their traditional territory under the protection of territorial law rather than military occupation. 3 months later, autumn painted the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in shades of gold and crimson that seemed to celebrate the peace that had settled over the region. The new territorial agreement, officially signed by Governor Harrison himself, granted the Apache autonomous status within their ancestral lands, making them neighbors rather than enemies of the growing settlements. Cordelia stood in the doorway of their new home, a beautiful cabin built jointly by Apache craftsmen and settler volunteers, representing the cooperation that had replaced centuries of conflict. The structure blended both architectural traditions, sturdy log construction favored by the frontier families, decorated with intricate carved symbols and painted designs that told Apache stories of harmony and strength. Inside, she could hear Magnolia laughing as grandmother Itzel taught her to weave traditional baskets, the old woman's patient voice mixing English and Apache as she explained each step. The girl had blossomed in their new life, learning skills from both cultures while maintaining her own bright spirit. The harvest celebration is ready, Kayatur announced, emerging from the barn where he'd been helping prepare for the evening's festivities. The bullet wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar that he bore with characteristic stoicism. Half the territory seems to have accepted Mayor Cromwell's invitation. Indeed, the meadow below their cabin was filled with an unprecedented gathering. Apache families sharing the clearing with settler families, former enemies now united in celebration of a successful harvest season. The aroma of roasting venison and fresh-baked bread mingled with sage smoke and wildflower honey, creating a feast that honored both traditions. Mrs. Kayatur, Doc Hennessy called out as he approached their porch, his medical bag replaced today with a bottle of his finest whiskey. I trust you're feeling well? You've been looking a bit peaked lately. Cordelia exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on her still flat stomach. Actually, Doc, there's something we've been meaning to tell everyone. The announcement came during the evening feast as representatives from both communities gathered around the great bonfire. Kayatur stood with his arm around his wife, their faces glowing in the flickering light as he spoke. Friends, neighbors, family, he began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd. When I married Cordelia, I gained not only a wife but a bridge between our peoples. Tonight, we share news that will strengthen that bridge even further. Cordelia stepped forward, her smile radiant. This spring, our child will be born a child of two worlds, two peoples, two cultures united in love. The cheer that went up from the crowd seemed to shake the very mountains. Apache warriors ululated their joy while settler families applauded and whistled. Children from both communities danced around the fire, their excitement infectious. Grandmother Itzel approached with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "This child," she said, placing her hands on Cordelia's stomach with reverent gentleness, "will be a bridge builder, a peacemaker, a living symbol of what we can accomplish when we choose understanding over hatred." Judge Morrison raised his glass of Doc Hennessy's whiskey. To Cordelia and Kayatur, whose courage turned a cycle of violence into a foundation of peace. And to their child, who will grow up in a world where Apache and settler children can play together under the same sky. As the celebration continued late into the night, Cordelia and Kayatur slipped away to their favorite spot on the cabin's porch, where they could watch the stars emerge above the mountain peaks. The same stars that had witnessed their first meeting, their desperate wedding, their trials and triumphs. "Do you ever regret it?" Kayatur asked softly, pulling his wife close against the cooling night air. "Leaving your old life behind for this uncertain path?" Cordelia considered the question seriously, as she always did his thoughtful inquiries. Below them, the sounds of celebration continued, Apache drums blending with frontier fiddles, children's laughter echoing off canyon walls, the murmur of conversations in multiple languages creating a symphony of human harmony. "Never," she said finally, turning to face the man who had become her heart, her home, her future. "That night when you offered me life, I thought you meant mere survival. I never dreamed you were offering me the chance to help birth a new world." Their kiss tasted of promises kept and dreams yet to be fulfilled, while above them, the eternal stars bore witness to a love that had indeed moved mountains and changed everything.